Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar. If you have any questions today, please type them into the Q&A icon located at the bottom toolbar, and we'll answer them at the end of each presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurie. I'd like to welcome everybody to the August 2nd edition of Crop Talk. And seems like a lot of stuff, a lot of tours and field days going on right now. So a lot of information happening, and then a lot of work on our side going on with disease surveys and getting that stuff kind of caught up. And this is the time of year for checking that. And then also Kim has been busy with one of our new problems in the province with Waterhemp. And so I thought it'd be a good idea to maybe get Kim to come on today and talk about Waterhemp. I think we're going to have producers being back out in the field here shortly. If you're not already doing some harvest, then it's a good time to be scouting as you're going up and down the field and seeing if you do have some weed problems. So Kim's going to talk a bit about that today, and then we're going to head into our crop scouting panel to answer a few questions. Some of the panel won't be here today because they're doing disease surveys, and we also have some tours happening. So I guess with that, we'll turn it over to Kim and get started on this week's Crop Talk.
Sure. Thanks, Lionel. I'm just gonna just give me a second here. And just let me know when you can see my screen in presentation mode. Oops,
see your screen, just waiting for the presentation.
Yeah, just waiting for presentation mode. Oh, there we go. Okay.
Perfect. Looks
I can
great,
see it
Kim.
on my end. I'll just get my pointer going. Okay, yeah, so want to talk to you guys about Waterhemp. We've been talking about it for quite a while now, probably a good 5 years in the province since we've had it, really had it and really kind of been watching for it, but it is starting to pop up more and more. We've got an area where we've got several fields infested in one area, so I'll talk about that in a bit, but I'm just going to go over just some real quick things. You know, when we're talking about like some of the reasons that we have these herbicide resistant weeds is that there really has been nothing new. This is the herbicide group. So we're always talking about which group the herbicides are resistant to. So we talk about group 9, you know, that's our glyphosate. When we talk about group 10, that's Liberty or glufosinate. And so basically herbicide weeds become resistant to herbicide groups. And even if there is some subfamilies within that group or some families within that group, like our group 2 has, you know, 4 very different families within group 2. Some are broadleaf only products, some are grassland broadleaf products, but the resistance is in general to that group 2 and all of the families within that. So anyways, there has not been a new mode of action since about 1982 when that was when our last group 13, that's our clomazone, their command that we use in canola. And so right around there in the 80s was when we had group 2s, group 27s, group 13s, and there hasn't been anything since really. So we don't have anything new. And this is the problem, is that we're looking at chemistries that we have been using for a very long time. And there's new products within those chemistries, like within those families, you know, there's new chemistries within those families, so there's new brand names, but a lot of the new brand names you're seeing nowadays they aren't new products at all. They're just rebranded, and they are combinations of existing products that we have been using for over 40 years. So that is a problem. So that's kind of how we've ended up here. When you look at herbicide-resistant weed species on the Canadian prairies, this is a graph put together by Charles Geddes and at Ag Canada in Lethbridge. And basically, you're looking at, you know, your group 1 inhibitors over here, your green foxtail, your wild oat, your yellow foxtail. Our group 9 inhibitors, we've got kochia, downy brome, and waterhemp. These are our group 2 resistant weeds, and so are our ALS inhibitors. And you know, these are a huge bunch of weeds in here as well. You know, group 3, we know we have green foxtail that's resistant to group 3. We have some group 4 resistance as well. Here's our group 14 resistance, group 5, and then group 15 as well. So, you know, we've got lots of resistant issues as well. And now we're starting to add in, you know, our water hemp and our Palmer amaranth into these, in some of our new weeds that are coming into the province are already resistant. This is basically homegrown resistance, this chart. Most of this is homegrown resistance, but now we're looking at weeds that are coming to our province, and they're arriving already preloaded with resistance, and they're resistant to several groups, not just glyphosate. So this is a list of, now this only goes back to 2020, and there's been a few more since then. But this is basically a list of our group 9, which is our EPSP synthase inhibitors. That's basically glyphosate herbicides. And so basically the ones that I've circled there are the ones that we're most concerned with here in Manitoba. This down here is the old name, or one of the names for Canada fleabane. And here's our Amaranthus tuberculatus, which is Waterhemp, then our Amaranthus palmeri, which is Palmer's. There's our kochia, and then we also have this Amaranthus hybridus, which is a smooth pigweed, and so we have that in Manitoba as well. And we do know that worldwide it is glyphosate resistant. So they basically we've had our first product, glyphosate was first registered way back, well over 40 years ago. And very shortly after that, we started seeing some resistant weeds, and there's quite a number, and this list just keeps growing and growing. And so we do know we need to be really, really careful when once we get glyphosate resistance, it just takes, it's a lot more management dealing with those weeds. So now this data goes back, or these graphs or these pictures, sorry, go back to the last time we did a herbicide resistance weed survey prairie-wide. So we do these province-wide surveys, like we did one last year. And so now that work will be coming out. We do an abundance survey, which means we count, all the weeds in the fields that we go to. And then for some of those fields, we go back and we harvest weed seeds at harvest time. And they get grown out and they get sprayed to see whether or not they're herbicide resistant. So that's going on right now. That takes usually a couple of years to get all that data out, because there's a lot of weed seeds and they have to get sprayed with a lot of different products. And basically then it's measured to see how bad our resistance is. But basically, as of the last round of surveys for the prairie-wide surveys, Manitoba looked like 68% of our fields had some sort of herbicide-resistant weed in it, and Alberta was not far behind, in Saskatchewan as well. So we fully expect those numbers to go up. You can see as in this graph in here, as we started surveying way back and doing this type of a survey, so we can compare from year to year to year. Way back in the early 2000s, we've had a steady increase in herbicide-resistant weeds, even if we are able to slow down the rate of increase. These lines are never going to go down. We're going to continue to find herbicide-resistant weeds. And once you have a herbicide-resistant weed on farm, you have it for life. Even if you got away from using products that that weed is resistant to, the minute that weed is still there, that seed bank is there, that herbicide resistance does not go away. So it's really important, especially for these weeds that are coming to the province now, to not let them establish and to not get them so that they're on all of our fields and that they're province-wide. The other herbicide-resistant weeds we're dealing with, that's homegrown. We've done that through, repeated use of the same chemistries over and over again. We've done that, and we're living with that now. We do have an opportunity now to try to stop some of these new weeds from coming in. And the problem is that they are coming in preloaded with resistance. So we're already in trouble by the time they get here. So the herbicide-resistant weeds in the west that we're most concerned about, obviously kochia, and any of you guys down in the southwest part of the province, this is a huge issue for you, but it's actually a big issue across most of Manitoba now. Like, we're seeing lots of it in the Interlake, lots of it in central Manitoba. It's really becoming a big issue. Wild oats, especially up there in the northwest, that's a huge issue. Downy brome is something that we're watching for. We do know that it's in Alberta, and we haven't seen it here in our field crops. We tend not to have a lot of winter annual crops anyways, but it is something that could certainly invade our pastures and our haylands. And then also Waterhemp and Palmer amaranth. Again, that is a weed that is not here yet, and but we are starting to see it pop up here and there, and we do need to be really, really careful with that one. And then coming soon is Canada fleabane. This is a weed that is here and has been here for many, many years. It is not herbicide resistant yet, but we do hear reports of that there's some suspicions, and we are watching for that one. So I will touch briefly on the Canada fleabane, because I want you guys to be watching for that, especially as we're approaching harvest. And any of the weeds that didn't die, that were sprayed and didn't die, we need to be really suspect of. So Waterhemp and Palmer amaranth, those are tier 1 weeds regulated under the Noxious Weeds Act. They must be destroyed when they're found. A tier 1 weed must be destroyed. That's either through hand pulling or mowing. I mean, you could try to spray it again, but obviously it's there because it's resistant. That where we're finding it, it's already resistant. So that's why we find it. The herbicides didn't work on it. So it's getting very large and, starting to set seed. and we really want to get those, we need to get those removed before they set seed, before that seed hits the ground. They must not be allowed to set seed because they're prolific seed producers. Depends on what you read about these plants, but even a regular water hemp plant that's in a field with some crop competition, you could be looking at 200,000 to 500,000 seeds. Generally, you might be in that 250,000 seeds. I don't know. It just, the numbers, it's a big number, regardless of how many 100,000 it is. It's well over 100,000 seeds. And so those seeds would all lead to resistant plants if they were all allowed to grow. And that's just one plant. And there are fields that are infested elsewhere in the world, just right across the border in North Dakota, with thousands and thousands of plants per square meter even. Even in Ontario, they have found some water hemp infestations as high as 4,000 plants per square meter. That's about 400 per square foot, which is quite mind-boggling, but that's what they are dealing with elsewhere, and we don't want that to happen here. So what we're finding mostly in the last few years, when we're finding most of them in soybean fields where glyphosate is the only herbicide that was used. We also tend to find it quicker or more often, I guess, in the wide row soybean fields because there's just a lot more bare dirt that shows. And this weed tends to do really well when it gets high light intensity, when it's got bare ground, when it's not shaded out. So this year, our soybeans have been a little bit slow to close in anyways. So particularly on the wide row soybeans, we're seeing it, but we certainly have seen it on narrow row soybeans as well. We always find it where it's a Roundup Ready soybean, and all they've done is spray Roundup on it. Some of these beans are Xtend beans, but the dicamba was not sprayed. So when glyphosate's the only product that was used in crop, we are finding these weeds show up. So they're obviously already glyphosate resistant when they arrive. You need to also monitor, though, all of your corn and soybean fields, your dry beans and your sunflowers, anything that's grown in a wide row, and anything that has, a lot of glyphosate in the system, like our corn and soybeans. And again, we're finding it in the fields where they're just using nothing but glyphosate. But also dry beans and sunflowers, those are there's not a lot of herbicide options in crop for those. Those are wide row crops. There's not a lot of crop competition early on in the season. And also your in-crop options, again, are so limited. And they're usually in the herbicide groups that the water hemp is already resistant to. So those are where we need to monitor. But we also know that our clear field and our Roundup Ready canola fields are vulnerable, as there are no in-crop options that work on water hemp and Palmer amaranth. So with those crops going forward, we would really encourage producers to be putting down something like an edge ahead of time to get some of those weeds out, because your in-crop options are basically products that these weeds are already resistant to. So if you had any seed bank there in that field and these weeds start growing, there's nothing you can do in crop that will control this weed. So you can get yourself into trouble pretty quick in some of these crops. Previously, water hemp that was found in Manitoba was resistant to combinations of groups 2, 9, and 14 chemistries. So again, it's all group 9, and then usually it's a 9 and a 2 or a 9 and a 14. And I think in a couple cases, we had a 9 and a 2 and a 14 resistant. So again, that's getting frightening that we've already lost those chemistries on some of these plants. Not every single water hemp plant in a field would be resistant to all of that, but we do know the resistance is there. And then, of course, when we do have resistant weeds and we kill everything else that isn't resistant, the resistant ones flourish, and then the seed bank very, very quickly becomes nothing but resistant weed seeds. So this is just an example of how quickly these plants can grow, and this is why we're seeing them now. As our crops are growing, these weeds are growing more, and they're growing more rapidly, and they get taller. And this is, if you look on the left-hand side over here, this is 4 days after emergence. This is what water hemp looks like 4 days after emergence, and then this is just over 2 weeks after emergence. It's already about 8 inches tall. When you look at Palmer amaranth at 4 days after emergence, it's already very big. And by 16 days after emergence, just over 2 weeks, we're already at a foot tall. So these are both very large weeds. We have only seen Palmer amaranth a couple of times in Manitoba. They do get very, very tall, and they will stick up above a corn or a soybean crop. So those are things to be watching. If you do see something in crop that's taller than your corn or your sunflower, that would be something that I'd be very nervous about, and I'd be wanting to check that out. But even our water hemp, it does get quite tall. I'm about 5.5 feet tall, and lots of the water hemp now is about my size. So even in a big tall soybean field, they're starting to stick up. But these ones we don't notice quite as much in our taller crops, like our corn and our sunflowers. But definitely in our soybean fields, they are starting to stick up above the canopy, and we're definitely noticing them. So I like to show this picture. This is from last year. This is one of the first weeds we got in. These are our 6-foot long boardroom tables in Carmen here in our boardroom. And that's my guide to crop protection from last year, just in comparison. So you can see the size of this weed, and the size of the root system on it is tremendous. And so in a year, like, you know, and they're very competitive. They take a lot of moisture and nutrients. And, you know, but the big thing is the amount of seed that's on one of these plants is incredible. When you look at the picture here on the right-hand side, that's kind of what the inflorescence looks like. The leaves look very much like a pigweed leaf. You can tell it's a pigweed, but the inflorescence is very different. You get these long, snaky seed heads. They can be a couple of feet long. You know, my book here is, I think, you know, almost a foot long in length here. And these seed heads get really long and snaky, and they droop over, and they're not that thick bottle brush type that's on a red root pigweed. And I've got some pictures. I can show you that in a minute. Anyways, this is an infestation down in the DeSalis district, where we've, you know, this is actually looking towards the road, and there were some ditches there that have been flooding, or there's been some overland flooding there for a couple of years, coming out of some drainage ditches and then in some municipal ditches. And we're just we are seeing some of this water hemp moving into the field, and so we think it's being carried around in the water. These are very tiny seeds, and that's certainly one of the ways that this weed does move around, is in the waterways, because the seeds are so small and they get moved around. So we were seeing huge amounts of water hemp in here. And so in a case like this little area of crop was actually mowed out to get rid of that water hemp. It was not possible to pick all of that. So that's been mowed out now. Did find it also in the very same area, again in some ditches that had been flooding over in recent years and flooding into the cropland. This is actually in a wheat field, and this is a water hemp plant right here, really not setting any seed yet. But it's getting quite tall, kind of got these long skinny leaves on it. And then when you look at that wheat field from the road and you're looking in the ditch, this is all water hemp in here. And they had started mowing next to the crop because it was water hemp kind of all through this ditch. So these ditches are now all mowed, so none of this will set seed. They will be mowed again and or sprayed, because we will get regrowth off of all of these. But this edge of this wheat field was mowed to take out all of these plants like this so that they don't set seed. So this is a good pick that I've got. And this is the edge of that wheat field, kind of in the corner where some of the crop had actually drowned out. And you've got a red root pigweed right here, and you've got a water hemp here. So the leaves on the water hemp are a little bit, they can be long and narrow, a little bit more longer, a little bit more narrow. Usually a bit of a darker green, because sometimes this one, our other pigweeds are quite dull green, but this one can be kind of a darker green, maybe almost a bit shiny. This one is bigger, but they come in all stages. We did have everything from seedling water hemp all the way up to full grown water hemp in this field, but just along this edge, just side by side with the red root pigweed, they do look very similar, but there are some differences if you can pick up on that. And so just to show you where we were, how this is spreading through the province. This is our water hemp map from 2021. And this means in this map, these have been confirmed by DNA analysis that it is water hemp. And in 2021, you know, we had a few RMs. By 2022, we had added in some right here in the Saskatchewan border. There was just one plant found in one field there. So that's still very isolated case right now, but that was something to watch for. That was found in a Roundup Ready canola field. And basically we filled in a lot more red down here in the South Central and up into the eastern part of the province here. We will be adding DeSalis now, because we've had there's several fields affected down in DeSalis that are right along some drainage, you know, some drainage areas. So we're really be watching those areas where there's been any kind of flooding, and where any water could have been pulling, you know, bringing those seeds onto the field with it, as those fields were flooded in the spring or last fall even. So we do know these maps, we expect to see a little bit more red on them, but basically it's getting pretty filled in anyways. And I believe we're just waiting to hear confirmation on something in the Piney RM as well. So this will be pretty red by the time we get some the DNA analysis confirmed. So this is multiple herbicide resistant water hemp in Ontario, just to show they had their first case of water hemp in 2014 that was resistant to glyphosate. And by 2021, they now have some 5-way resistance. So any of these orange groups in here are resistant to group 2, group 5, group 9, group 14, and group 27. So you can see the resistance there has spread very, very quickly from their first finding in 2014. And the map as of 2022 was very, very similar, just more orange on it. So this is something that is not good. And we do not want this to be happening in Manitoba. The problem with water hemp, again, is that it develops multiple herbicide resistance very quickly. Initially, it comes in probably resistant to glyphosate, maybe group 2, maybe group 14, but it very quickly develops resistance to all of these other groups as well. And when you're looking at this, when you're looking at our corn herbicides and, our bean herbicides, those 14s and those 27s are really important to be using. We don't want to lose them. So there is a harmonized surveillance of common water hemp across Canada. I'm a member of this working group. It's actually called a Weed Surveillance Community of Practice, and it's part of the Canadian Plant Health Council. And so you can see this map of Canada. There's us here in Manitoba, here's Ontario. So this is where we know where these water hemp are, and we're monitoring them and trying to see where they're, and monitoring the herbicide resistance in them, and trying to manage that, because these are devastating weeds in some cases. Like if left unchecked and where they're not controllable, like they cause almost complete yield loss in soybeans and corn. So there are fields down in the States where this started now that are not farmable for some crops, because there just are no options left at all. There's a 5-way resistant water hemp in Ontario, but I think down in the southern states they're at an 8 or 9-way resistance, which means 8 or 9 different herbicide groups just no longer work on that weed, and you basically have 0 options left. You are out of herbicides. There's nothing left but hand weeding, and so people are starting to lose their farms over this weed. So one thing I do want to caution you too, because I know we're starting with harvest, you're sitting on the combine, just really be watching for these weeds. Canada fleabane, or horseweed it's called. Sometimes it's called mare's tail as well, but we call it Canada fleabane mostly. It's a winter or summer annual. In Ontario, they've had group 9 resistance since 2010. Again, that's our glyphosate, but they now have group 2 resistance as well. In North Dakota, there's lots of different biotypes of this weed, and they have multiple herbicide resistance, or it's just kind of naturally tolerant to a lot of different chemistries. But they are looking at 2, 3, 6, and 8, which is now lumped in with group 15, 9, 14, 15, and 27. So this is something that we really need to watch, because this weed has been here already, and we could have been selecting for some resistance in it. And we did have a couple of cases last year where we thought we had some resistance, but we weren't able to confirm that. And we're watching for that. So if you suspect you have any of these weeds, please let us know. We do want to get them verified. We do want to try to make sure, and then we know what we're dealing with, and then we also know that we need to be warning others as well. So this is what Canada fleabane looks like. Sometimes in the rosette stage, it's kind of got these roundy leaves on it, but it's a bit like, it almost looks like a kochia, but it does not branch like a kochia. You just get these long, skinny plants like this. It'll never branch unless you mow it or burn off the growing point, and then it will tiller a little bit, but it never branches like kochia. But it does look like kochia at a smaller stage, but it does have these little jaggedy notches right there where my pointer's pointing on the leaves, whereas kochia does not have that. And kochia is a hairy weed as well. This is a hairy weed, but kochia is a very fine, soft hair, and this hair is a bit more stiff and prickly. It's a bit rougher feeling. So, but again, once they get taller, it's very distinctive. This is a picture of it from Ontario in a bean field, and you can see how it can just absolutely overtake a field very quickly once you start getting resistance in it. So I want to also quickly talk about harvest weed seed control, because we are approaching harvest and there's still time to look at doing something at harvest weed seed control. Some of these methods I'm going to talk about are pretty simple, and others are much more complex and, involve, capital cost, capital purchases, and that type of thing. But basically, there's a number of things you can do. There's narrow windrow burning, which would be just putting all of your weed seeds and possibly your straw, but maybe just the weed seeds. That would be narrow windrow burning, would be dropping all the straw and the weed seeds on top of that out of the back of the combine and burning that. If you're doing a field-wide burn, we tend not to get temperatures hot enough to kill weed seeds, but if you're doing in narrow windrows and setting those on fire, we do tend to get the higher temperatures, more intense heat, a better burn, and that does kill some of the weed seeds. A good portion of the weed seeds can be controlled that way if you get a hot enough burn going on them. Chaff cart, there's some old style chaff carts out there. There's a new style in Manitoba called the boomerang cart. That's an Australian model that's actually being manufactured right in Manitoba. And, so that's another option where you actually would divert the chaff into the cart. You could still spread all the straw and then take that chaff with the weed seeds in it right off the field and either use it as a feed source for cattle or just remove it from the field and either compost it or burn it or something like that. Bale direct, that's a method where you would actually hook up a baler right behind the combine and the straw, and the chaff is dropped on top of the straw. That actually usually goes on a conveyor belt right into the baler, and then the weed seeds are baled up and then they're removed from the field. Now you need to be careful with that because the weed seeds are still there. They're just being removed from that field. They're going somewhere. So whoever's taking control of those bales needs to be aware that there's weed seeds in them, but it does remove them from that field. Chaff lining or tram lining, this is usually kind of the entry point for people that are doing weed seed control, harvest weed seed control. And basically, this is either, making some type of a chute at the back of a combine. You usually put a baffle in there to divert the straw away because you still want to chop and drop the straw, but you want to get the chaff with the weed seeds in it away. So you'll either there are some kits that you can buy that you can put on the combines, or some people just make their own. There's lots of stuff online, and I'm going to show you a few websites too where you can go to look at that. But the chaff lining is basically dropping it in a narrow row and then either coming and setting that on fire later on, and trying not to move that around with any tillage later on. But they'll drop all that chaff in a narrow row, and you get this thick layer of chaff in this narrow band, and you end up with it'll kind of self mulch, and you get some weed seed destruction that way. You can get, obviously a lot of weed growth out of that little narrow band, but you could spray that and make sure you're spraying that with something that's going to kill those weeds. Chaff tram lining is very similar, but in this case, lots of times that chaff is being diverted down in behind a wheel, a traffic, like the combine, the rear wheels of the combine. And this works really well for people who are doing controlled traffic farming. And then that chaff row is going in the same row again and again and again and again. And when you're tram lining those tram lines, they usually don't have crop growing in them anyways. You wouldn't be disturbing them. And so those weed seeds are going down there, and either you destroy the weed seeds as that chaff row mulches, or you could set it on fire and burn them as well. And weed seed impact mills, this is something that works really well for weeds like waterhemp and kochia, and not so good for weeds like wild oats. It tends to drop a lot of seed before it even hits the combine. But if those weed seeds get into the combine, and then they get to the right place within the combine, as long as the combine is set properly, then those weed seeds go through an impact mill, and basically they are ground and they are not viable. And there's different mills on the market, but they can have a very good control of weed seeds. There's very good destruction of weed seeds, of the weed seeds that get into the combine and get through the mill. Most of them, very high percentage, like 95, 98% of them are destroyed. So that's really good. Problem is with all of these methods, these are for weed seeds. These are for weeds that are already on field, and weed seed that's on field, we're just trying to stop that seed bank from getting worse. Ideally, we would not want to, we don't want the weeds on the field in the first place. But when they do get on field, and we are trying to deal with that and not add to the seed bank, these are some of the methods you can use. When you are doing any of these, it's crucial to optimize the combine settings to ensure that weed seeds are captured, and using a combine loss monitoring system, something like a bushel plus, where you're making sure that everything is set properly and the grain is going where it's supposed to. You're not throwing too much out, and the weed seeds are going where they're supposed to. And I think there's a term there: know what you throw over. And so you need to be knowing what you're throwing. This is just some pictures of that, basically, dropping everything in a narrow row, dropping the weed seeds on top. Here you're doing bale direct, and those weed seeds, it's really literally right in behind the combine. Here you're dropping weed seeds in behind a wheel, it looks like. And then we've got a chaff cart, an older style chaff cart in here. And again, this is an older style of, this is the Harrington weed seed destructor that was a tow behind, but now they're all integrated, and they are actually they bolt right into the combine, and they basically go on all colors, all makes. Basically anything, I think if your combines are 10 years old or newer, pretty much any of the systems out there will work. And there's about 4 different brand names of harvest weed seed destructors that work. And the Redicop one is made right in Saskatoon. and the others are made, I think, in Australia. So anyways, they're physical impact mills, and just here's I love what it looks like in behind the combine. And there's a couple of different ones here, or there's 4 different ones here, I guess. Here's the Redicop one that is made in Saskatchewan. We don't have a lot of these on the prairies yet, but they are starting to be used. And again, this is something that we can do to eliminate weed seeds from hitting the ground and from growing into more resistant weeds for the future. And so the cost of these ones, their capital cost anywhere from $50,000 to $120,000. They need horsepower to run them, and there is nutrients and organic matter lost when you're removing the weeds off the field. And so just some sites to finish off this herbicide resistant action committee. There's lots of information. If you have any questions at all on herbicide resistant weeds, there's all kinds of information here. This is put together a lot of stuff on here. And like Dr. Ian, he reports a lot of herbicide resistance worldwide. So there's lots of info there. I also follow this Grow site. You actually can get weekly emails from them, and it's actually called Getting Rid of Weeds Through Integrated Weed Management. And there's lots of different ideas there, and lots of good work, and lots of different scientists contribute to this. So that's a really good website to be aware of and to be watching for information on. And then another one is this Weed Smart, which is actually weedsmart.org.australia. It's from Australia, and because they've been dealing with with herbicide resistant weeds for so long, they've been dealing with that, and this is just a screenshot of their webpage, and this is a site that's good to visit and just kind of see what's going on elsewhere in the world, because they have a much bigger problem than we do. So we can learn from their mistakes, and we can learn from what they're doing that is working. And I think these are really valuable websites, and this is really valuable information out there as we are starting to see more and more herbicide weeds on our own fields. So that's all I had. If there's questions, I can take them. I think, Lionel, you did have a few questions, right?
You bet, yeah. Okay, to start off here, will Waterhemp react similar to kochia and mowing? I guess what they're getting at here is when you mow kochia, it still tends to go to seed in the fall, and so and very close to the ground. So are you seeing the same type of regrowth from Waterhemp?
Yes, unfortunately, yes. I have seen it regrow in some fields where there was some mowing done in 2021. There was some regrowth within weeks of it being mowed. It was coming from below the cut, the cutting point, or where the water hemp had been cut. And water hemp under good conditions can set viable seed in as little as 2 weeks. So we do know that if we are mowing, we need to be very aware that we need to be watching that for additional weed control in the fall, either through tillage or through some herbicide applications, even high rates of 2,4-D. I would be staying away from. Not staying away from. I think I'd be careful using some of the dicamba products in the fall if we're going to be using them more and more in our soybean crops. We don't want to be overusing any chemistries, and we do know that the water hemp has become resistant to dicamba down in the States, where it has been used a lot over the last 10 years. So we do need to be careful with which products we're picking, but you do need to be aware that there will be regrowth. It's a pigweed. They all will do that. And they actually can even germinate after harvest. So not even the ones that are cut off and mowed or cut off through harvest. Those ones will regrow, but you also can get germination after harvest, and they will set seed by freeze up. They don't set a lot of seed, but it still would be resistant. All the seed on there would be resistant. So you need to be really careful of those ones as well.
Okay, and I guess just another thing for dicamba, if you're using it in the fall, the residue might be an issue to watch for the following year too, right?
Yeah, you need to watch, and that's in the product pages in our herbicide guide, and also on the label. And just depending on which crop you're growing, you need to have that dicamba on by a certain time. And basically, the more vulnerable crops, you have to have that dicamba on early. And I think the dates are like September 1, September 15th, October 1, that type of thing. So you just need to check the label on that one as to what crop you're going into next year, and make sure that you have given it enough time for it to break down. But that's on their label.
Okay. In previous years, we blamed sometimes seed as being an issue for bringing in different weed seeds. Is this something we should worry about with water hemp?
Honestly, I don't think so. I mean, yeah, I guess yes. There's always a chance of bringing in some weed seeds in any seed you bring in, but when you look at the size of a soybean seed or the size of a corn seed compared to a water hemp seed, there's just it's not something that is easily it's the size difference is tremendous, and so I wouldn't think that that's the main. That is certainly not the main vector. That we can never rule that out as a possibility, but we do know that it's moving in waterways, it moves in the digestive tract of birds, it moves in any kind of dirt that's moving around. You've got as much chance of it being, if you're bringing up seed from somewhere, as being in the dirt that's in, the box of the truck that's carrying the seed. You need to watch, like, anywhere where there's dirt build up. So on any equipment, and for sure we know it's moving around in equipment because we know how hard equipment is to clean out, especially of small crops like canola and small weed seeds, which are even tinier. Like our water hemp seed is very, very tiny. And so we do know that we have to be really careful with equipment moving around. So even custom combiners and that type of thing. But I would not think that water hemp, because the seed is so small compared to seed like soybeans or corn. I don't think that's the main vector of it moving into Manitoba. Now, there's other crops it could move in if we're talking millet seed or anything like that. Yes, certainly that's a place that it can be moving because it's very, very hard to clean out of that type of seed. But in the crops that we're mostly finding it in, it would be not coming there, I think, in the seed.
Okay, and I guess the only thing that came to my mind there is when you mentioned millet would be when we're looking at seeding some of these cover crops that are a combination of several different seeds. That might be another thing to be watching for as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it would be very, very hard to find, to get that separated out of a millet seed sample. So we do know that Palmer and water hemp have been moving around the United States in some cases because of millet seed. We also know one place that's been moving around is in screenings. I mean, and I guess to show you the point that it's not really in the seed, it's in sunflower seed screenings. So as the sunflower seed is cleaned, the millet seed is coming out the water hemp seed is coming out in the screenings. And as the screenings are being fed to cattle around North and South Dakota, the water hemp is moving around in the screenings. So in that case, it was definitely in the field, but it's got screened out again because of the tremendous difference in seed size. It's something that's easy to screen out, but it's in the screening. So that's something to be watching if anybody is looking at feeding screenings as to where they're coming from and what could possibly be in them as well.
Okay, and just one comment. Somebody said that it was good that you mentioned the resistance in kochia, especially in areas where kochia is, I guess, not been as big a weed problem. The resistance there is starting to show up.
Yes, it is showing up everywhere. I see it in my travels as I travel around the province, and it is really becoming a problem in the Interlake region as well, especially in the South Interlake there. Really become an issue there, whereas, in the past, that hasn't been a weed that they've worried about too terribly much. So, and I grew up in the southwest part of the province, and I've known kochia since I was just a little kid. So we've always had it. It's always been there, and it's gotten much, much, much worse in the last few years. But it is definitely starting to move around the province and getting into areas that they really had not dealt with it before. So guys need to be really careful of that. I would assume it is all glyphosate resistant. We know the numbers will be very high. The glyphosate resistance has definitely been growing. I don't have a number on that yet because we haven't had any official numbers on how much is resistant since 2018. But we do know in Alberta and Saskatchewan, where they have had some recent herbicide resistance surveys actually finished and quantified, the glyphosate resistance has jumped tremendously. We do need to really watch our kochia as well for group 14 and group 27 resistance, and those are products that we have used. And used well, and they have worked well in the past, but we do need to be watching for those because we know in Saskatchewan and in North Dakota, they are starting to find some populations of kochia that are group 14 resistance, and we have some suspected, some suspicions that we have some group 27 resistance starting as well. So we know the group 4s that we've been using as well for kochia are starting to not work. They're starting to fail. And so that's our dicamba and our fluroxapyr products. And so we need to be watching as well and just keep mixing it up and keep doing lots of different things and keep using lots of herbicide mixes. And that's going to be our best defense. That and, really good crop rotation. And then every time you grow a crop, grow it as good as you can, make it competitive.
Okay, great, Kim. This is going to change the topic a little bit, but I had a request come in. If you can make a few comments regarding staging of peas for desiccation. I think we'll maybe go into more detail next week, but maybe for those of us that have peas that might be getting close to go, if you can maybe make a few comments today.
Yeah. Yeah. So depending where your peas are going and depending what you're using for desiccating. So if we're talking a true desiccant, you're talking something like a Reglone, a dye pot product. And so, when you're looking at peas, basically those bottom peas need to be dry and ripe and they need to rattle. So they need to be very dry already because Reglone is a product that needs to go on, the plants need to be mostly, they need to be very mature anyways, because it's a very rapid burn down or burn off of them, very rapid dry down, sorry. And so we need to have that very mature. When we're looking at glyphosate, if you were looking at glyphosate for peas, I think they just say, just looking at the label, it just says the majority of the pods are brown. So you want them to be brown. So you need to have like 80% of those pods are brown, but obviously the glyphosate takes a little bit longer to use and so, or longer to work. And so they don't need to be quite so far along. But if you are using the Reglone, you need to have those bottom pods actually really brown and the seeds need to be dry and rattling inside. So that's the difference between those two products.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kim. And like I mentioned, we'll maybe try to get maybe more in-depth conversation regarding desiccation for next week. So thanks for the presentation, Kim. A lot of good information. And I think it's something we need to keep our eye on as these weeds become more and more of a problem. Last thing we need to do is be hand weeding. It doesn't look like the weeds in the picture there that you're holding are very, very fun to be picking out. So.
No, they're not. And the problem too with those is that they've already got seed on them. So when you're pulling them out of the field, you're probably dropping some seed, because you're shaking them around. Those need to be dug out. They don't pull out easily and they will regrow if you pull them out. Even if you break them off at ground level, they regrow from whatever root is left in the ground. So you're getting some regrowth on them. And as we're approaching harvest, just do not put that through a combine. If you see a weed like that in the field, stop the combine and don't put that through. I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of weeds. That's a big plant that I've got there. There would be a lot of weed seeds on that plant. And when we're talking, some of the other water hemp, even if it's only a couple 100,000, that plant that I'm holding, I'm suspecting has far more than that. But even if it's only a couple 100,000 seeds, that's a lot of seed to be putting through a combine and spreading. You're just going to spread it everywhere. So we need to be really careful when we're combining. And like a combine is just the best thing you've got for spreading weeds on your field and then across your whole farm as that machine moves from field to field. So I know it takes time and nobody wants to stop a combine, but you do not want the headache of having hundreds of thousands of those plants on your field next year or in the next few years.
Great. Thanks, Kim. Okay, to our crop scouting panel. And the first question I got is for John Gavloski. There was a registration that came through on Lygus bug control in sunflowers, and I thought maybe he can make a few comments on it today.
Sure. So the registration, it's for a product called Carbine, and it's a product it's registered for as an emergency use for Lygus bug on confection sunflowers in Manitoba. So the registration is just for the confection sunflowers, which is quite appropriate because Lygus bug really isn't an issue in oil seeds. The reason Lygus can be an issue is because when they feed, before they take up any food, they inject a little bit of their saliva onto the seed, and enzymes digest a bit of the area around where they've injected it. Then they suck up the juice. Those enzymes create a brown, bitter tasting spot on the seed, which is the problem. In oil seeds, that's not an issue, but in confection, it is. So the emergency registration is for carbine. In confection sunflowers, for lygus bugs, it's just for Manitoba, the emergency registration. And carbine is a it's quite a selective product. It works on sap feeders like aphids and lygus bugs. It won't do anything to most of your beneficial insects. So it does. One of the reasons that was selected for the emergency registration was because of its minimal impact on pollinators such as honeybees. Now, on the label, it does say minimal impact, not no impact, which means it does recommend still taking precautions, spraying late in the day, and doing the normal things you would do to try to preserve bees and pollinators. But again, it isn't broad spectrum. It won't kill off a lot of your other beneficial insects.
Okay, and John, I had to go back in my picture library to see if I could find. So are the pictures accurate there that I put up?
So yes, that's lygus bug, and all three of them that have a bug on them, they are all lygus bugs. Yes.
Okay, and distinguishing mark, I was looking for the triangles. That's their own right.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, that's right. It's got that very distinctive, very oval shape to it. Now, their color can vary. Sometimes they're a very light brown. Sometimes they're very dark, almost a black. So the color can vary. We do have some different species of lygus bug, but they all do have that yellow triangle or V-shaped area right below their thorax. It's an area called the scutellum, and yes, they've all got that V there.
Okay, good. Thanks for that one, John. I got another one for you, and this one fooled me, and I sent you some of the pictures, but maybe if you could just maybe make a few comments. We've seen this before. I thought I was looking at the forest ant caterpillar, but if you could maybe just explain what these guys are.
Yeah, so the confusing thing is with tent caterpillars, they're a spring, early summer issue, and their tents are very different than these. Their tents are usually in the notch of a tree, not over a branch, and they're an early season thing. Later season, tents on trees and tents that cover a branch can be one of two things. It could be something called the ugliness caterpillar or something called the fall webworm. And the way to tell them apart is if you can see the larva, which you did send a picture of some of the larvae, these have a lot of spines and spikes on them. If the larva inside the tent late in the season has spines or spikes, it's fall webworm. If there's no spines or spikes, then it'll be ugliness caterpillar. So this is fall webworm. The the nest will cover often a good chunk of a branch. Um, it looks horrible. You will lose a lot of leaves within that branch, but outside of where they've nested over things, you don't usually see a lot of defoliation. So this is very much an aesthetic thing. If it's in a shelter belt and you're not worried about the leaf loss on that branch, it's probably not worth worrying about. Where people get worried is when it's on their ornamental trees in the yards and they don't like the sight of it. But the tree is going to do just fine. Again, it's more of an aesthetic concern.
Okay, and one more for you, John. I was out doing some uh, disease surveys and was checking on wheat for fusarium and was finding a lot of aphids on the head. I know we talked a bit about this last week. I was wondering if you could maybe just mention the stage where they won't do any more damage. And is that a lacewing fly that was on there?
Okay, so a few things. First of all, the staging. Wheat and wheat, oats, barley, all your small grains remain susceptible up until the soft dough stage. Once you hit soft dough, then your grains have filled, and the aphids aren't going to drain what's already filled. They will be competing. They will be plugging in their proboscis into the stems and the leaves. They compete for the sap, but once the grains hit that soft dough stage, their yield potential has been formed, and the aphids really aren't an economical concern at that point. Prior to that, even when you're still in the milky stages, you're still forming yield. And if you have high enough aphid levels, then they can still be economical. And high levels means more than about 12 to 15 per per stem on average. So if on average things look like this and you were still in the milky stage, that would be of concern. If you have advanced to soft dough, it's probably not going to be economical to worry about them. Now, regarding what's there, you've got a real interesting mix of things in your photos. First of all, you've got two different species of aphids, at least here. You've got some, the upper photo on the upper left, you've got some darker ones, and there is a little kind of almost rusty colored patch along the end of the abdomen. Those are the oat birdcherry aphids. The ones beside them, they look like a species called green bug. They, which tend to be a very light green aphid with almost a dark green stripe down their back if you look carefully, and they won't have the dark black cornicles at the back and black bands on the legs. And I think I see a third species in here too. The bottom picture, you've got a bunch of abdomens sticking up, and some of those do have very distinctively black cornicles, but there's still a lighter green aphid, and those are hard to say when you can't see the whole aphid, but they're potential English green aphid. So you've got a mixture of aphid species. The other thing you've got there is a lot of white specks. Those are the shed skins of the aphids. So when you're doing your counts, you don't count the white specks. That's just molted skins. You've got a aphid mummy. If you look on the far off to the right, yeah, you've got the cursor right over it now. So that's in kind of a bronzy colored inflated aphid. So what happened there was a wasp laid an egg inside that one, and the wasp larva lived inside it and ate its guts out. And if there's a hole in the back, it probably means that the wasp has emerged, and if not, then the larva may still be inside. In this case, you still may have a larva inside that one. The thing with wings is actually a winged aphid. It's not a lacewing. Aphids can have winged and non-winged forms, often when they get very dense. Some will develop wings and they disperse, and also late in the season, when they're actually mating, like most insects do, they will develop wings. Early on in the season, they're just reproducing what we call parthenogenetically, where they give birth to live young without mating, and they don't need wings when they're doing that. So most don't have wings unless things get too dense. Late in the season, you start to see more of the winged aphids.
Okay, good. Thanks, John. There's a lot of information on that slide, and I just kind of wanted to maybe refresh everybody's memory. This was definitely a soft dough stage. Kernels were formed already, so there's lots. But I was thinking it would be past the stage where any insecticide would be worthwhile putting on right now. So good. Thanks for just clarifying that and for pointing out what we had in the picture. Okay, a few more slides here before we finish off today. The weekly crop report came out. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it, but I thought this was one slide that I think a lot of people are interested in, and it's really showing what's happening in the province right now. And you could see that in the southwest and the central region, and in the central region, we're looking at about 40% of the wheat crop right now, about in good condition, 50% in fair, and about 10% in poor condition. You go to the northwest, which kind of follows the way a lot of the rains have been going the last few systems that have gone through. They've been going through kind of north of the park and then kind of wrapping themselves around and then going towards Winnipeg or the eastern side of the province. And you can see where 80% of the crop there is good and 20% is fair. So that kind of just gives you a summary of what the wheat crop looks like. And, you could probably lump in a bunch of the other crops in there, as well as everything in kind of the southern and central region is definitely in need of a good rainfall. And in some cases, we might be getting to the point where it's maybe getting a little bit late even for that to do a lot of help for this year, besides helping that crop finish out and fill. Reminder that the crop residue burning program starts August 1. So that was yesterday. So if you're doing some harvesting and wanting to do some burning of crop residue, you need to be checking the website to see if there's burning days are allowed, and if whether you require a permit or not. So definitely check that before you go out and do any burning. Couple of days left for crop diversification centers and their tours. If it's not too late, or if you're not too far to drive up to Roblin, the tour is today. I think it starts in about a half an hour, and there'll be a lot of good information there up at Roblin at PCDF. And if you miss that one, there's one more coming up, MCDC in Carberry on August the 9th. So can definitely take that one in. Crop production extension specialists. We've been doing a lot of work in the field lately. So if you've got questions, you're seeing something that you're not quite sure of, we've been seeing lots of stuff and talking about lots of different things happening. So if you see something and want some more information, give us a call and we can probably give you a hand with that. Our livestock specialist, I think we're going to be getting a lot of use this year with our developing a feed program, because we're going to have some good quality feed, but we might be using some other feed to kind of stretch out the feed supply. So definitely take these guys' numbers down and give them a call if you're looking at any kind of questions to deal with livestock. MASC service centers, there's the numbers for them. I was reading somewhere that I think they're going to online signing of your forms, I think, too. So that if you're hearing something about that, it wouldn't hurt to give them a call just to maybe get some more information and see if you can be doing some more stuff online. And that does it for today. I'd like to thank our presenters again and thank you for attending. And we'll see you next week, August the 9th. And I'm guessing if the weather stays the way it is, we'll be doing a fair bit of harvesting by then. So thanks for attending and see you next week.